For 300 years, the Vikings were the most feared people on Earth. They conquered kingdoms. They sailed oceans no one else dared to cross. They built an empire that stretched from the frozen shores of North America to the burning markets of Baghdad. Kings trembled at the sight of their ships. Armies ran at the sound of their war cry. And then they vanished. The most powerful warrior civilization in history simply disappeared. No final battle, no great defeat. They were just gone. This is the story of how the Viking Empire fell and why the world never even noticed. To understand how the Vikings fell, you have to understand how high they climbed. At their peak in the 900s, the Vikings controlled more territory than the Roman Empire ever did. From their homelands in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, they conquered England and ruled it for decades. They dominated northern France. They colonized Iceland, then Greenland, then reached North America 500 years before Columbus. In the east, Viking traders called the Rus built trade routes from Scandinavia all the way to Constantinople. They founded the dynasty that became the Russian state. No civilization their size had ever achieved anything close to this. Their secret weapon was the Longship. 80 feet of overlapping oak planks, light enough to carry over land, shallow enough to sail up any river, and fast enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean. While the rest of Europe huddled near their coastlines in clumsy merchant vessels, the Vikings were already gone, racing across open ocean at 200 miles a day with nothing but the stars to guide them. The Longship didn't just carry Vikings across the water, it made them unstoppable. And their warriors matched their ships. Vikings fought with a ferocity that terrified every army they faced. Their berserkers charged into battle bare-chested, howling like animals, feeling no pain. European soldiers had never seen anything like it. Kings across the continent paid enormous ransoms, called Danelaw, just to make the Vikings go away. The word Viking became the most feared word in every language in Europe. It all started on a single day, June 8th, 793 AD. A group of Norse warriors sailed across the North Sea and landed on the holy island of Lindisfarne off the coast of England. They broke down the doors of the monastery. They killed the monks. They stole the gold, the silver, the sacred relics, and they sailed away before anyone could stop them. It was the first recorded Viking raid, and it sent a shockwave across all of Christendom. Monks began writing a new prayer in their journals: "Lord, deliver us from the fury of the Northmen." After Lindisfarne, the raids exploded across Europe. Every summer, Viking longships appeared on the coasts of England, Ireland, Scotland, France, and Spain. Monasteries were the easiest targets, rich, undefended, and full of gold and silver. In England, the Vikings didn't just raid, they stayed. By the 870s, they had conquered nearly half the country and called it the Danelaw, governed entirely by Danish Viking law. In 845 AD, a fleet of 120 longships sailed up the Seine and besieged Paris. The French king paid 7,000 pounds of silver just to make them leave. The Vikings took the money and came back for more. But the Vikings weren't just raiders and destroyers. At home in Scandinavia, they were farmers, poets, lawmakers, and master craftsmen. They created one of the first parliaments in the world, the Althing in Iceland. Women in Viking society had more rights than anywhere else in medieval Europe. They could own land, run businesses, and divorce their husbands. Their gods were as fierce as they were. Odin sacrificed his own eye for wisdom. Thor wielded a hammer that shattered mountains. The Vikings believed that dying in battle was the only path to Valhalla, the great hall of the slain. Death in combat wasn't something to fear. It was a reward.
Runes on his shield whispering to Odin. In the shield wall, they charge without fear, for death is the reward.
They built the largest trade network the medieval world had ever seen. Arab silver coins have been found in Swedish Viking graves. Byzantine silk has been found in Norwegian tombs. They traded furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves across 3 continents, connecting Scandinavia to Baghdad, Constantinople, and beyond. The Vikings didn't just raid the world, they connected it. Centuries before the age of exploration, the Norse had already mapped the trade routes that would shape global commerce. But every empire has a weakness, and the Viking Empire had several. The first crack came from the inside. The Vikings were never truly united. They had no central king, no capital city, no national army. They were clans, families, rival warlords fighting each other as often as they fought outsiders. The same ferocity that made them unstoppable in battle made them impossible to unite. A Viking chieftain's worst enemy was often the Viking chieftain next door. Then came Christianity. and it changed everything. One by one, Viking kings began converting to the new faith. Harald Bluetooth of Denmark was baptized around 965 AD and declared all of Denmark Christian. Olaf Tryggvason forced Christianity on Norway at sword point. Convert or die. The old Norse gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, were being replaced. And with the new god came new rules. Raiding monasteries was now a sin. Blood sacrifice was forbidden. The warrior culture that had powered the Viking Age for 300 years was being dismantled from the inside.
Dismantled not by armies, but by a new faith.
Meanwhile, Europe was learning how to fight back. The kingdoms that had spent centuries as Viking victims were getting stronger and smarter. They built fortified stone bridges across rivers to block longships from sailing inland. They constructed massive castles that no raiding party could breach. They trained professional standing armies. In England, Alfred the Great built a network of fortified towns called burhs, designed specifically to resist Viking attacks. His grandson, Athelstan, united every English kingdom into a single nation, built for one purpose: to fight the Norse. For the first time in 300 years, the Vikings were facing organized, coordinated resistance. The easy raids were over.
The world has changed. Our time is over.
The final blow came in 1066, the year that ended the Viking Age forever. The Norwegian king Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking warrior, launched a massive invasion of England with over 300 longships. He landed in the north and won his first battle easily. But the English king Harold Godwinson force-marched his army north at incredible speed and caught the Vikings completely off guard at Stamford Bridge. The battle was a massacre. Hardrada was killed by an arrow through his throat. His army was destroyed. Of the 300 ships that had crossed the North Sea, only 24 sailed home. It was the last great Viking invasion, and it failed.
300 ships came. Only 24 returned.
But the cruelest twist was still coming. Just 3 weeks after Stamford Bridge, a new army landed on the south coast of England. William the Conqueror arrived from Normandy with a fresh invasion force. Harold Godwinson, exhausted from destroying the Vikings, had to turn his battered army around and march 200 miles south. He met William at the Battle of Hastings on October 14th. Harold was killed. England fell, and the Normans took the throne. The ultimate irony: the Normans were themselves descendants of Vikings, Norsemen who had settled in northern France and become French. Vikings conquered England one final time. But they no longer called themselves Vikings. Across the Atlantic, the Viking colonies were dying a slower death. Greenland's climate was turning brutal. The medieval warm period that had allowed Eric the Red's settlers to farm was ending. Temperatures dropped, crops failed year after year. Livestock froze in the fields. Trade ships from Iceland and Norway stopped coming. The colonies that had once thrived on the edge of the world were now starving, freezing, and completely cut off from civilization. By the 1400s, the Greenland colonies went silent. No more ships, no more messages, no more contact at all. When European explorers finally returned centuries later, they found only empty ruins, abandoned churches, and skeletons. The last Vikings in Greenland had vanished without a single word. Iceland survived, but it was no longer Viking. The Althing still met at Thingvellir, but now under Norwegian and later Danish rule. The Old Norse language evolved into something new. The pagan traditions faded into folklore. The sagas were preserved by Christian monks who rewrote them through their own lens. Iceland became a quiet Christian farming colony, not a launching pad for warriors. The fire was gone. This was the real killer of the Viking Age. Not a single dramatic battle, not one crushing defeat. It was assimilation. Everywhere the Vikings settled, they slowly became the people they had conquered. In France, they became the Normans, speaking French, building castles, worshiping Christ. In England, they married Saxon women, farmed Saxon land, and within a generation were indistinguishable from the English. In Russia, the Rus Vikings established the ruling dynasty of Kiev and Rus, the foundation of the Russian state. But within a few generations, they spoke Slavic languages and followed Slavic customs. The very name Russia comes from the Norse word Rus. The Vikings built Russia, and then they became Russian. They didn't die, they dissolved. The last pagan Vikings held out in Sweden, where the great temple at Uppsala continued blood sacrifices and worship of the old gods into the late 1000s. But even Uppsala eventually fell to Christianity. The sacred trees were chopped down. The golden idols of Odin and Thor were smashed. A Christian church was built on the ashes. By 1100 AD, there was not a single pagan Viking kingdom left anywhere in Scandinavia. The old gods were dead, and the people who had worshipped them had become someone else entirely. So the Vikings didn't fall in one dramatic moment. They faded. Christianity replaced their gods. Europe learned to fight back. Their colonies starved. Their warriors married into the cultures they conquered. They became kings and farmers instead of raiders and explorers. The Longship, the greatest vessel ever built, was retired and replaced by heavy European merchant ships. The fire that had driven the Vikings to cross oceans and discover new worlds simply went out.
One will, proving courage could conquer the world.
But what they left behind is staggering. They gave the world its first parliament. They discovered North America 5 centuries before Columbus. They founded Russia. They conquered England twice. They mapped the North Atlantic when the rest of Europe was afraid to leave the coastline. They built a trade network that connected 3 continents. And the Vikings are still with you right now. Tuesday is named after the god Tyr. Wednesday is Odin's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday belongs to Freya. Words like skull, knife, anger, ugly, window, and even the word law all come from Old Norse. The Vikings vanished, but their language is in your mouth every single day. The Viking Age lasted 300 years, from 793 to 1066 AD. They shaped the world more than any civilization their size ever has, before or since. They didn't disappear because they were defeated. They disappeared because they became the world they conquered. Their blood is in the veins of millions of people across Europe, Russia, and North America, who will never know it. The Vikings are everywhere, and nowhere. They didn't fall, they became invisible, and the world never even noticed.